have you here, and I'd love for you to share your story of your own journey and what got you to doing the work that you do today.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, well, I always think, God, where do I start? So I guess I'll start at the beginning. The beginning is that we got married and fairly, conventional, traditional situation. We got married and then we waited for a little bit, but then we decided we were ready to start a family. And I think immediately I just assumed that we would have some issues because I had never had regular periods. So my
Mhm.
cycles were always really erratic, all over the place. And I think always in the back of my mind, I'd always thought, well, I know that's not right, but I didn't
Yeah.
have anywhere. Looking back now, I can see that there was like huge gaps in my knowledge and education around cycles and women's health. So,
Yeah, because we're never
um,
taught that. So what were your cycles like, if you don't mind me asking, just to kind of get an
yeah,
idea?
yeah, sure. I mean, they would just be so um, unpredictable. So I would have some that were relatively normal, I suppose, but still not really like long cycles really. And then sometimes I would go months without having a period, and then I would
Mhm.
have one. And I just had been on the pill for a long time in the end. I just went on the pill and I didn't think about it.
Mhm.
Um, and I did have some other symptoms, like I had quite bad skin and I had which seemed to be hormonally related, but I
Mhm.
never did anything about it other than just go on the pill because I just didn't
Yeah.
know anything.
That's the only solution we get, right?
Yeah, and it was just people didn't really talk about it, so I didn't really understand anything. So I went on the pill, came off the pill when I was ready to start a family. But I was quite proactive, and I just went straight away to the GP, the doctor, and I just said I want to have a baby now. But I am going to presume that there might be some issues because I've had never had a regular cycle in my life. So she actually sent me for a scan straight away, which now I know is actually quite unusual, I think, to be taken so seriously straight at, right at the beginning of my journey.
Yeah.
Um, but she was good. She listened to me. She could hear there was obviously something going on. So she sent me for a scan, and they told me, first of all, it was all very confusing because that first month that we'd started trying, and I went for that scan, and they thought that I was pregnant, and they looked in that when I in on the scan, they were really confused, and they were like, "Oh, what's that? What's that?" And they got a second opinion in. They made me do a pregnancy test, and
Oh
I
my
was thinking,
gosh.
"Oh, brilliant! Month one, I've done it."
Yeah, right.
But I was not pregnant, and it was a fibroid. So what they had seen, what they
Oh, okay.
thought may have been an early pregnancy, was actually a fibroid. So when they saw that, I'd never heard of it again, had no idea. They said, well, of course, it might cause problems conceiving. And so I suddenly went from them suspecting that maybe I was pregnant to them telling me, oh, and I had polycystic ovaries. That I
Oh
had that,
God.
and that also there was a fibroid, so that could cause problems. So anyway, sorry, this is very detailed, but
No,
I'll
no,
carry on.
it's good to be detailed because there's a lot of people listening and people in the journey or just beginning. So I think it's really important for people to hear. I think the stories are so powerful in that way.
Okay, good. I'll carry on.
And I like to hear the details too, because that's the way my mind works.
Yeah, good. Okay. So and also I'll say this as well, because I do think this is quite important, that I wasn't very happy with my treatment at that hospital. I didn't like how they spoke to me. I didn't like how I felt. I just didn't feel very comfortable or safe, actually. When I say safe, I just mean I just didn't feel I didn't feel confident, and
Yeah,
especially
I
when you're
totally
quite
get what
early
you
on.
mean.
When I was in that room and you're not used to it at this point, when they're like, right, knickers off, up you get, legs up. And I was like,
Right.
oh, it felt really like sudden. And
Yeah.
I just didn't feel good about it. And I actually I did complain, and I said I didn't feel that was well handled. I didn't feel looked after. I didn't feel good about that experience. And even the process of kind of saying that, I felt was quite empowering to say I didn't
Yes.
think that was
Hmm.
good. And also I think you do need to feed back to healthcare professionals, because they get
Do.
so caught up in their work that they forget that there's a human being there that has never had to lie on the table with her pants off to like
100%. 100%. It's so true.
and
Yeah.
I can put myself back there even now, and I go back, and that's a good, gosh, 7, 8 years ago now. And I can remember exactly what that felt like and how I felt as quite
Mhm.
an uneducated, like quite naive person going into it. Um, so that's important to say, I think, to kind of make sure you're getting the care that you require. And I think especially in the UK, because we have the NHS, so everything's, you know, free if you do use the NHS. Sometimes you just kind of go, well, you know, it's fine because this is for free, so I won't complain. And actually you should get the service that you
Yeah, absolutely.
so that's that. And then I actually was referred to another hospital, and then, to kind of cut a long story short, what happened in the end was that I decided to, they gave me the choice. They said, you can either carry on and just hope that this fibroid won't get in the way, or we can do an operation, we can remove it. So I just thought, well, let's get rid of it. I mean, what's the point in having a potential you know, issue? I mean, that was just my mindset at the time. I was quite kind of like, this is what we'll do. So I might have thought differently about it now, having a bit more experience, but I don't know. I think I'm still quite like, well, that seems like a sensible idea. So I just went straight ahead and had this fibroid removed. And then after that, I started to have my cycles monitored, and they put me on Clomid pretty much straight away. And then I went, basically, again, long story short, I had 6 rounds of Clomid. None of them worked or were successful. So then I went on to injectables. So I was on I can never say it. Gonadotropins.
Gonadotropins.
Thank you. There we go. I said in another podcast I was on the other day, I was like, I just remember it as dolphins. I just call them the dolphins. So that's me. I was on the dolphins for a while. And anyway, which essentially it's really almost half the IVF process, because you're going in, you're having your blood work done, you're going in for scans, you're injecting, you know, you're doing all of that. But at the moment where in IVF you would go to have your eggs collected, you know, you're just sent off on your merry way to have your timed intercourse, which is the least sexy thing
I know
known to mankind. So yeah, we did a lot of timed intercourse, which is a whole other podcast in itself, I think.
For sure.
Yeah, and then none of those worked. And actually that was the most stressful time for me, like coming into kind of mindset, well-being stuff like that. At that point, I think, because it was, you know, coming on to like 10 rounds then of fertility treatment plus the operation, and it had all been fairly quick. So, you know, I think at this point I was around 2 years in or something like that, and it had been quite intense. And just because I'd had all these treatment rounds, all this monitoring, and it still wasn't working. You know, my husband had his tests and he seemed to be fine. So there didn't seem to be any explanation. And it just felt so confusing and scary. Yeah. And I didn't feel, I was just like, well, why? No one could tell me why it wasn't working. And I didn't feel like I had, I think it was at that point that I started having counseling as well. And then looking into alternative things and really like trying to get my head around a more holistic approach. And that started to really, really help me, because I just lost myself completely, you know, in those, because all of a sudden you find yourself in this world and it feels so overwhelming and so confusing. And you're trying to kind of have a PhD in like what all this actually means. Totally. And, you know, you have to put your complete faith and trust in the healthcare professionals that are looking after you without really, and it's hard to stand up for yourself when you don't really know what you need to be standing up for.
Oh my God, such a good point that you just, it's totally, exactly.
Yeah, so I think that by the time I'd been in it for a while, and then by the time I'd started just connecting to a few people who did understand this world, like my acupuncturist who I'd found, who was so calming, and I just felt like she was almost like my therapist as well. And then I had counselling with a fertility specialist through the NHS, which was really good. And I started learning about nutrition, and that really helped me, because it just helped. I just felt like that was me taking a step towards reclaiming my mental health, my actual health, like even completely separate to what it was doing for my fertility, whether or not it was helping. To me, just learning about nutrition and eating really well was a way that I could feel better in myself, and that I could feel like I was doing something to help my mental health and help, you know, every element of this whole process really, and give me the energy that I needed to get through it. But the thing that really did change how I was approaching things at that point was just working on my mindset and working on my own inner growth and personal development. And that's kind of where that's where I was sort of found this kind of revelatory mindset shift, which has now led me into doing the work that I do now. But it kind of came from just a feeling of total, like, what the fuck, like,
Yeah.
I can swear.
Yeah, you can swear.
That's okay. Sometimes there's only one word
there's
for it.
no other word. Yeah.
Sometimes that's the only word. So yeah, that is where it came from. And that's where I always try to say, like, whenever I'm working with people, I'm like, I'm not coming from this like higher place of, this is what you have to do to have a great mindset. I'm like, no, I know where you're at, and I was there too.
Yeah.
But what I think is useful to know is that you can be in that place, and you can come into a much more gentle and more powerful and more and a safer feeling, so that you don't feel so out of control, you don't feel so scared all the time, you don't feel so anxious all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my kind of parallel there. And then what happened was, after those 10 rounds of unsuccessful treatment, then we finally moved to IVF, and we had a successful round, and I got pregnant with my daughter and had my little girl 4.5 years ago. So she was my kind of, that it took 11 rounds of treatment. And I do always say it was 11 rounds of fertility treatment. I always say it wasn't 11 rounds of IVF, but it was 11 rounds of fertility treatment. Because a lot of people just equate fertility treatment with IVF. And actually, and I know it's not just me, because I say this quite a lot, in my community, and I say, like, try not to minimize other ways of getting to that point. You might not even get to IVF, but you still might go through a really challenging road to bringing home that baby. If you do bring home the baby, there's still all that, so it's not to kind of, and so I say, we were incredibly lucky that first round work, but we did also go through 10 rounds of unsuccessful treatment before that. But yeah, so that was successful, extremely lucky and grateful. And then after that, we actually tried, well, once my daughter was old enough, once I felt ready, nothing to do with her really, but once I felt ready, we did start trying for a sibling. And we tried for 1.5 years naturally, because I was having regular cycles after I'd had my daughter, but nothing happened. So we went back and did a frozen embryo transfer. Again, we were really lucky to have frozen embryos, and it was successful again. So I had my son 18 months ago. And there we are. That's kind of in a nutshell, kind of what happened to me and what led me to doing the work that I do now.
It's amazing, because I have a lot of people with very similar stories. Well, in the sense, obviously every story is very unique, but in the sense that they went through it themselves, and they realized a lot after the process, kind of in hindsight, and said, I don't want anybody having to go through this again the way I did. And I think that the fertility coaching business has really taken off recently. It's become a thing, and it really is an amazing thing, because you do need some advocate. Sometimes you need somebody outside of yourself when you're so lost and you have no idea, like, where am I going, to have somebody actually advocate, because you can go back in time in your mind to think about what you went through, and how much easier it would have been to have somebody pull you through and explain to you what's going on. Because that's really what it is you have no idea what's going on. You have no other choice but to trust the professionals in front of you. And sometimes those professionals aren't right, or they're not right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely say, make sure you are working with people that you do trust and that you have some kind of rapport with, and that you feel comfortable around, because there's going to be questions that come up, and there's going to be things that you might not understand, and that you really need to have you need to understand the protocol, like, if you are going through treatment, like the back of your hand, so you don't, because it's quite scary when you first get home and you have to inject yourself, and you're kind of looking at these little, I remember looking at the vials and being so panicked that I was going to spill one, or that I was going to get a big air bubble in one of the things, or whatever, just all these little things that you might not even think would cause extra anxiety, but when it's quite, it does. And God, it all comes flooding back when you when you remember.
Yeah, for sure. And it's almost like you're being asked to create, to have a new profession in a sense, because you're taking charge in a way that you've never been trained to before. I mean, you're actually needling yourself. I mean, it's very scary.
It is. And I think what, what I'm really passionate about as well is just trying to raise awareness in society, because so many people will say things which just are so unhelpful.
Yeah,
Making the comments that just kind of compound how difficult it is for you.
yeah,
And but I think it works two ways. It's understanding that people will say that stuff, and that there are ways that we can manage it without it kind of becoming um so difficult to manage that we don't go out, or we don't see people, or we try and hide ourselves away, because I don't think that that's a very healthy thing probably to do. We
yeah.
need to stay, we need to see people in our lives, and of course we've got to do what's right for us. And I understand, I know absolutely that people approach this in different ways, but it's got to get to the point where we become confident enough to know that we can manage, like, if people do say things which are really unhelpful,
Yeah.
which I, as I say, it's a dual thing that I'm trying to do here. It's like, stop the people saying stupid things, but also help people who are on the receiving end of them manage it, so that there's a
Yeah.
kind of that you don't feel so at the mercy of those comments and things that kind of come your way, because it's just still so misunderstood, I think.
It is.
And
It's really misunderstood. I think that it's kind of like something that a lot of times people go through quietly. It's very much like a cancer diagnosis, the
mm,
way people feel, the experience of it. And you're kind of going through it a lot of times on your own without other people knowing.
mm,
So, and then people not understanding it and kind of saying the things that they're saying, it's just kind of salt to the wound. And it makes it so difficult. So what do you suggest
mm.
as tools or ways to cope with that?
So I think for me, the first thing is to work on your own self-compassion and your own self-worth and value, because once we're a bit more gentle with ourselves, and once we're speaking to ourselves in the way we need to speak to ourselves, we're going to be in a much better position then to kind of deflect, or put up our nice healthy boundaries, so that we're
Yeah.
able to just say, without any, it doesn't have to be a difficult passive aggressive thing, it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
angry, doesn't have to be really anxious making or stressful, but we can say, actually, that's quite unhelpful to say. It's really useful for me, actually, if you just support me, or like, actually, this is what I need from you. So you're able to just guide the people in your life a little bit more without it feeling like extra work. And there are going to be people who just don't get it. There are going to be
Yes.
people, in
Yeah.
your life, who will just continue to just not understand, and just while you're going through this, they're just not your people. And so there's one thing of like, when the comments come from like left field, or like from people you don't know, or just out of the blue, I would always just say, just have a few stock responses in your back pocket that feel natural and empowering for you to say, and that you're comfortable for you, like, that you're comfortable saying. But also, if there are people in your life that you can't get away from, say it's a family member or whatever, um there just has to be like a mantra in your mind, or just something that you go to that helps you to remember that it does, just let it go over, and
Mhm.
just gracefully distance yourself as much as you can from people in your life. I mean, I had a really good friend, actually, who it wasn't that she was saying the wrong things, it's just that her life situation was very different from mine at that point. And I was quite able, actually, with most of my friends, even with pregnancy announcements and things like that. I became quite good at managing them. They didn't, after a while, they didn't trigger me,
Yeah.
because I worked on my mindset, and I was able to find a place of total. I know it sounds bonkers, but I did find a place of kind of acceptance with where I was at. And also to say, with like, I know acceptance can be such a interesting one to bring to the table with this stuff, because people get quite and people listening, I know that, and my clients say this to me, that I don't accept it. I don't accept it. Why should I accept it? And I understand that. But what I would say is, you don't have to accept it forever. But if you can find a place of acceptance that this is what's happening right now, it doesn't mean that you're giving up. It doesn't, not that there's anything wrong with that if you decide that that's what you want to do, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be in the place forever. It just means you're accepting that right now, in this moment, this is what's happening in your life in the present moment. And it just takes this massive layer of tension off, because you're not fighting all the time. You're just like, all right, this is happening. And it's kind of like that with the comments and the announcements. It's like, yeah, that's going to happen, because people do get pregnant, or people do say mindless things, and people do share insensitively. And again, that's something that I do try and educate on. My Instagram, I try to help people understand, if you do have people in your life that are struggling to conceive or bring home a baby in any way, you can consider sharing your news in a more sensitive way. Don't send them a scam picture. Don't tell them face to face if you can help it. Try not to tell them in a group. Give them a heads up, that kind of thing. And again, it's so unique and different for individuals, but those are the kind of general rules of thumb. So again, it comes back to that dual thing of like raising awareness and trying to help people understand more, and at the same time taking a bit more ownership ourselves of what's happening, so that we feel more robust and more resilient and able to manage. I think that's it.
I think that one of the things that probably are one of the hardest things is when you get caught off guard. And I think just kind of knowing ahead of time, this is going to happen, even though it doesn't make it better, it at least doesn't catch you off guard, and you have a little bit more awareness. Okay, so I can respond this way. So I think that that's a very key thing that you mentioned, is kind of knowing or having some things in your back pocket so that you won't get caught off guard, or at least you have something to get you through that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And strategies and things that that you can kind of, or even like there's sometimes people like one of my clients, we were working on something where I said to her, if you can find some kind of anchor for when you do feel like that, like you're caught off guard, or you just don't feel, your trigger comes up, or whatever it is, if you can keep going with some kind of mantra that you have in your head, or something that you hold, or something that you go to that is your kind of safety place. And she actually came up with this thing of like holding her hands together like this, because she's able to do that at any point. And for her, it kind of triggers this thing in her mind. And there's so many things that's so interesting, all this neuroscience stuff.
It is.
I'm like learning about it more and more now, but I'm fascinated by it, that we can kind of train our brains to know that when we do this, it means we're safe. And actually what happens when we're triggered, when we are caught off guard, we have that announcement, it's just our stress response is triggered, isn't it? So we just go into like fight or flight, and that's why our heart goes and adrenaline's going, and you feel really unsafe and uncomfortable and upset, and it's really difficult to say, wow, congratulations, I'm so happy for you, when you feel like you feel so your whole body is like reacted. And so if we can do all these little tricks and tools to kind of literally calm our nervous systems down, at the same time as kind of using affirmations, using whatever we can use in our minds to kind of just tell our brains that we're safe and it's okay, whatever works for you. That's why I always bang on about self-compassion as well, because it's such a powerful thing.
Oh, big time.
So just having, and then the more you learn about this stuff, the safer you feel, because you think it's all right, I've got my mantras, I've got my this, I've got my that. And then community as well, being part of a community of like-minded people who understand, so you can go straight to that community wherever they are and know that you've got that support that's there. And then you can think, okay, fine, I might get an announcement, I might get caught off guard, I might have a difficult conversation, but I have all these things that I can lean on and that are there for me when I need them. And that's what worked for me, and that's what changed how I felt about what was happening to me, I think.
And what I find too now is that the communities become a lot bigger online, and you can really connect with a lot of other people going through the same thing. And I mean, that's something that wasn't there before as much. And I find it to be such a gem or a jewel for so many people, just knowing that somebody's going through what you're going through and you're not alone in your experience is so healing.
It is. And just, podcasts like this, and that people can listen to and just know that loads of other people are listening and that we're here and we get it, and it just feels so comforting. And less, because what happens is that people do isolate themselves, don't they, because they feel like no one understands. You just isolate
Yeah.
and isolate and isolate more and more and more to protect
Right.
yourself,
Yeah.
to keep yourself protected. And knowing that there are lots of people that do feel the same as you, that are kind of fighting your corner, that understand, and that are like
Yeah.
rooting for you and cheering you
Yes.
on,
Yeah.
it's such a warm feeling, and it's such a yeah, like you say, like healing. And that's what we're aiming for all the time, like warmth and healing and self-compassion. And then in turn that becomes like self-advocating and empowerment,
Yes.
you know?
Totally.
um, but it starts with that like healing and acknowledgement and validation, I think.
I think so, because sometimes when you're going through that, it's kind of like almost a knee-jerk reaction to feel shame. And it's so not deserved, like, but you automatically feel the shame, like, oh, well, something's not right, or and that shame causes you to isolate. It causes
Mm.
you to contract. And then once you start to realize or get the validation from others and from a community that's safe, a safe place, or people that you can feel safe with, then it becomes a little bit more self-advocacy and empowerment. That's when you can kind of
Exactly.
stand in your light, and it just makes things so much easier at that point. I mean, it never doesn't take it away for sure,
Mm.
but just being able to go through it with a sense of empowerment and self-advocacy, I mean, it's a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm really keen on as well is helping people reclaim like all parts of their life, so that,
Mhm.
it's really not just about the fertility. It's about understanding like what lights you up in other ways, and how does that impact how you feel about the fertility stuff.
Yeah.
And, that's so important. And and not just, how to get through. It's not just how to cope, but it's about actually how to live your life, like in
Yeah.
your best, how to live your best life
Yeah.
while you're going through it, which, as you say, it does not take away from the pain and the grief, but
Yeah.
that's always going to be there, because life is a complex, beautiful, rich, difficult, amazing thing.
Yeah.
So it's that thing of kind of riding those waves, but understanding that even when, things are seem to be just going completely not your way, there's always something that you can lean on, even if that is to just have understand where you are and just have the clarity to go, I'm in a dark moment right here, but it will pass, and this is not going to be my life forever. It will change, because life goes up and down, and life is fluid, everything's in flux all the time. So when we're more conscious of that and more mindful that we might be going through a really difficult time right now, but it's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
Even just that little bit of perspective can help
Yeah.
us to kind of get through, and to know that we're going to be okay in the end.
Yeah, I think that that's really key. I mean, knowing that nothing lasts forever, because it is kind of like a way of life. I mean, the one thing that we can rely on is change. It's like the one consistency of life is that things always do change. And it is crazy. I mean, doing this work and seeing people and learning about people's stories, you do see, like, if you could take a snapshot, and the same thing goes with hormones too, like all the different labs that you have, everything's a snapshot in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you could take a snapshot last year and then take one this year, and it looks completely different. You would have never imagined you'd be where you were or
Mm.
where you are now. It
Mm.
really does shift. But it feels almost like you can't believe that it would ever shift when you're in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you're in it, you do need that moment of acknowledgement. It's really important to not breeze over it and to say, oh well, it'll be fine, because life changes.
Yes.
It's not about going, it don't worry about it doesn't matter, but it's about just knowing that again, coming into that being present and just accepting that
Yeah.
this is what's happening right now. But there's such a difficult, such a fine line between that kind of idea of fighting all of this and kind of never giving up, which I just think is such an unhelpful mentality, because it will just exhaust people.
Yeah.
Not only does that exhaust people, but it's not a helpful message, because you don't know what everyone's journey is going to do. You don't know
Yeah.
where people are going
Yeah.
to end up. So it's much more helpful to come into a place of like empowering acceptance and general peace day to day, where you're able to just be in it but also look forward at the same time. So that's that kind
Yeah.
of, it's that tipping balance, isn't it? And
Yeah.
but you know, without kind of a really regular check-in to see how you're doing and understand like where you're at, which is why I'm so obsessed with mindset work and well-being, and you know, doing that and checking in. Without doing that, you don't really know what you need to do in order to move forward, or how to come to a place of peace and acceptance. So yeah, that's where it all starts, I think. Daily
Yeah,
check-in.
and I think the big thing is it is so unknown. It's so unknown. You really don't know. And I think that that's like a, it's a lack of control, complete lack of control, and you have like really, you don't have like any knowledge of how it's going to turn out or what's going to happen, and that's where it could be very, very confusing for people.
Yeah. Oh, it's the number one thing that, you know, people always say to me, "Oh, that's the lack of control. I can't control this." And I'm like, I know you can't, you know, there's an element of having to release control, and there's
Yeah.
an element of having to trust, you know, in the timing of your life. Um, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay there always. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, the lack of control. But there's so many things that, you know, we can have control over, and that, you know, our internal response to everything is where it starts, I think.
Yeah. And so what do you, how, I guess, what kind of tool would you suggest to somebody that really is in this place of like, they just don't know? It feels like darkness because you just don't know what's in front of you. And
Mm.
you do feel a kind of this sense of out of control. Like, what kind of anchor can somebody rely on when they're really in there?
Mm. I think, well, first of all, I'd say, you know, it's really important to like be really truthful about where we're at. So if we're in a place where we do feel really dark and really depressed, then there could be that we need to see a mental health professional and get some you know, get some proper mental health support. But if you're in that, you know, place that you feel that you're ready to look at how you can shift some perspectives and get some clarity, then that is where you start. You know, that's where you might just start looking into, I mean, the thing is, the way I teach my course and my memberships is that I try to uh, invite people that I work with to take ownership of what it is that they're going to do. So I wouldn't ever say to people, go and do meditation or go and do some yoga or go and run or, you know, whatever. What I work with people to do is building what I call a life raft, so that at any point, like, and there's different columns in this life raft that I've sort of put together, and at any point, you know what it is that you're going to need to go and do. So if it's something that, you know, if you feel like really like you've lost complete motivation, or you're feeling really down, or you need something to give you more energy, then that's your kind of energy clear column, and you go into your energy clear column and you have a look and see like what works for you. So for me, if that's something that I'm working on and I want to get some more energy, or I'm lacking in motivation, whatever it is, I might look at my commitments, you know, my business commitments, my financial commitments, my personal commitments, and go, what is draining me? What is taking away from my energy right now? What feels heavy and what feels light? And this is something I literally actually have just been exploring with my own coach. Because I think that everyone should have a coach, really.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, whatever stage of life you're at, I just, you
Mhm.
know, it's just so incredibly helpful and powerful. But yeah, if it's something that feels heavy and you want to feel lighter, then what can you put down? What can you move? What can you shift? And the more we understand that we have a lot more control over our lives than we think we do, um, that's where we can start making big shifts. I mean, I've had people in my courses who have like quit jobs that they hate because they realize that they actually don't have to stay there. And
Yeah.
it's things like that, is that radical, like, oh, this is
Yeah.
my life, you know. So again, not just fertility stuff, but just understanding like when we're really connected to our core and our who we are, that's when we can make those really empowering shifts and changes. And then as a result, you know, quit the job you hate, so that massive energy drain, or that massive,
Mhm.
you know, source of like, oh, that's gone, you know, and this whole new sense of like potentials come on. And how's that going to make you feel about what's happening with fertility? So
Mhm.
it's looking at the whole thing in like a much more holistic way than I
Yeah.
think lots of people like tend to do, really.
Yeah, I love that. I actually love that. I find that to be very empowering because I think that we focus kind of, it's almost how Eastern and Western medicine, sometimes you can either focus on the symptom or you can focus on the person. and look at the whole of
Mm.
why things are just out of place or out of whack, and adjust the whole. And it
Yeah.
really comes down to all the different parts of us. We're not just kind of one, there's not just one part of us that stands alone as an island. We're not islands either.
Yeah.
We're kind of part of this big plan or this big process, living aspect of who we are.
Absolutely. And I think there's something about intuition and living intuitively as well, and understanding that sometimes, you might want to live a really, really, nutritious life of drinking your green smoothies every day and doing whatever. But then sometimes there might be a day when actually what you need is to sit down with a big bottle of wine with your mate
Yeah.
and just have like, do you know what I mean? That's how,
Yeah.
when you're living intuitively and
Yeah.
you do it with no shame or guilt or worry
Yes.
about
Yeah.
what the impact will be, because actually on that day, that's what you need. That's what
Yes.
you as a human being needs.
Mhm.
So yeah, exactly that. Like we exist as a whole and we
Yeah.
don't need.
Listen, the rebel inside of us needs TLC too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Totally. And that's what I found, is that I can only sort of live in a kind of structured way a certain amount of time. And then there's
Yeah.
a part of me which is just like, no, I don't want to
Yeah.
do this anymore. I'm bored. I want
Yeah.
to do something else.
It's
And
fine.
to have that freedom and to have that creative kind of spark, that's what gives you the energy and the motivation to be able to keep carrying on and to make the big decisions you need to make about clinics, or about,
Yeah.
what's my next step, or how am I going to decide what to do about X, Y, and Z in relation to my fertility. But yeah, it's much, much more holistic approach is needed, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because like you were saying before, when you first, what you said it so beautifully, and you really described it like very real. When you first go into it, you have nobody else to trust but the people around you. You kind of like, and then because you don't know what's going on, you're kind of relying on the information that you're being given.
Mm,
You almost remove yourself from your own sixth sense, which I think is such a big part of the whole process. And then you finally realize, wait a second, I have to go back here as well. This is part of this. It's part of
mm.
the information that I need in order to navigate this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely that. And you do think, oh, well, they know because they've had like years and years of training. And of course they do. And there's an element where you do need to hand over some
Yes.
trust, but again, that comes into trust. And when
Yeah.
you feel like you've got that trust with your whoever's looking after you,
Or
then that's,
finding that right person via your intuition.
yeah, exactly. And understanding that, how much information do I need to understand, and to what extent do I need to understand it? But yeah, without kind of feeling in a place of kind of calm and um yeah, empowerment, it just seems to be the word that I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
um it's really hard to know, like, where do I need to go and Google until 3 o'clock in the morning this diagnosis that I've been given or not been given, or
Yeah.
what else can I do to enhance my fertility? Or you can drive yourself mad, and you could drive, you could be Googling like nonstop your entire life. There
Yeah.
is so much information out there. So again, it's like having that discernment as well, of like, this is how much I'm going to research, and this is enough. This is actually enough. And these are my sources of information, and I trust them. So that's
Yeah.
where I'm going to stop, so I don't go completely insane as I go through this.
Yeah, great advice. And it's a cycle. So for people who want to find out more about you, how can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm on Instagram, this is Alice Rose, and my website is thisisalicerose.com. And yeah, it'd be amazing to support more people. And I have lots of lovely downloadable content which is there to support you. And I try to make it really accessible as well, and really, open to anyone who's interested in looking at mindset shifting and opening up the possibilities of how else you might be able to approach this. So yeah, come and find me.
Oh, beautiful. Well, it was so nice to have you on, Alice. And I also have all the links that you had just mentioned. I have them in the episode notes. If anybody wants to look there, they can find them. And it was great having this conversation. It's so important. I mean, it really is. And I think it's beautiful to hear other people's stories and details. All those things are very empowering, to know that somebody else went through it, and what you learned, and that people are not alone in this journey.
Absolutely. And they're really not. They're really not. And it's so helpful. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a real honor to talk to you.